Hi folks, I'm Sheila and welcome to Counsellor Convos. Let's get stuck in. Okay then, hello folks and welcome to another episode of Counsellor Convos. Now today we are going to be talking about addiction. We're going to be talking about alcohol addiction. We also may be talking about OCD. We'll see what comes up, and I'm here with the lovely Chris. Hi Chris.
Hello, Sheila. You okay?
Lovely to see you. And Chris, if you're happy just to introduce yourself to our listeners, if that's okay.
Yeah, so my name's Chris Evans. Currently a firefighter in West Midlands Fire Brigade. Been so for 20 years with various other jobs. I'm 40 years old. That's about it, really.
Yeah, great stuff, Chris. And, really appreciate you being on here today and talking about a topic that affects so many people, the topic of addiction. And if you're happy to go back a bit, Chris, as to when did addiction start for you?
Well, in hindsight, with all the work I've done on it, I realised it was from when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of it then, but I look back at my childhood and I was a very all or nothing little lad.
Yeah.
I'd run out the house and kick a football around for an hour. I'd go back inside, be unable to sit still for 5 minutes, and then I'd go out and do the same thing. And there was so many various little things like that. I had a lot of obsessive habits, which I still have, which people have probably picked up on, because it's that compulsion to do something. So when I was a kid, I had to, miss the cracks in the pavement. That's quite a common one that people talk about.
Yes.
I had to touch my nose, and then if I didn't touch it, I'd have to go back again. So although it wasn't an issue, it wasn't causing any problems. I look back and see that it was something that was in me from as long as I can remember.
Do you think, Chris, in a way, from your own experience, do you think people are born with these automatic kind of quirks and habits, or whatever you want to call them?
I think so, yeah, because it's the makeup of your brain, isn't it? And from the age of 4 or 5, which is my first memories, where else could I got that from? My mum and dad haven't got any addictive behaviours.
Sure.
So it was like there was something in me that was just making me act a certain way. So much about the brain that I'm not clued up on, that, makes you behave in certain ways. I spoke to a psychotherapist who did claim that you are born with addictive tendencies.
Okay.
And I know that it can be generational. Alcoholism can be, generational. So it obviously can be passed down that way, which means you can be born with it as well, doesn't it? But I think it can be a mixture of both, really. You can learn it or...
Yeah. And it's fabulous that you're talking about your own experiences, because I think people's stories are so powerful, because we are different, and it's important then that we share our stories, and then for lots of different reasons, that people don't feel so alone. Like, this is so common, Chris. What you're talking about here is so common, actually. And when we look at historically, this sort of stuff, it wasn't picked up. It wasn't seen as a thing, if you like. So I wonder for you then, Chris, when did it start to become a problem? Because you had these quirks, you had these behaviours, things you would do, just out of habit or various reasons. When did it start to become a problem?
So I think it was probably me early 20s, maybe 2021. I was quite when I got to 16, 17, I started to drink like most people do, and I was going down the parks, getting drunk, doing all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't really much of an issue in that period. I played a lot of football, and I was more bothered about being fresh in the morning than than getting drunk with the lads. Like, so sometimes I wouldn't drink and I'd just meet up with them. So it weren't really an issue,
Yeah.
from the start. Like, I probably had 4 or 5 years of drinking where, I was a little bit reckless, but nothing major. But then I got to about 21, 22, and it really
Mm-hmm.
started to be a problem for me. I was desperate to drink. It was on my mind all the time.
Yeah.
Um, I'd never have a couple of drinks and go home. You know, that never happened in my life. It would always be drinking until that I either physically couldn't drink anymore, or I had to go to work, or I had to go to an event somewhere, or that there was something to stop me. So I'd,
Yeah.
I'd wake up in the morning and I got into a habit of drinking first thing,
Yeah.
because
Do you
I
know
just
what,
couldn't.
Chris? Chris, it almost sounds like that when you look back early on in your life, you started drinking 16 or 17, you were playing football. Sometimes you didn't even want to drink because you wanted to be available to play football and all of that. And it sounds like at that stage of your life, you were in control of the drink, that it was very much a choice thing. It wasn't something you necessarily needed to. Then it sounds like 2021 that, as you say, it started to go wrong then. And it sounds like that the drink then started to control you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It was. Yeah, it was a. I mean, it was probably a gradual change or shift.
yeah.
I joined the fire service when I was 20, and it was a bit of a lifestyle, well, a massive lifestyle change that I struggled to cope with, because we work a 4 on, 4 off shift system. So
Okay.
I was a 21-year-old lad who might work all weekend, and then on the Monday morning I've got 4 days off, and I didn't know what to do with my time.
Yes.
So it was very easy for me to think, well, I've worked Saturday, Sunday night. This is my time off now. So it wasn't unusual for me to then get a bottle of vodka on a Monday morning and just start drinking it,
Yeah.
thinking that this was my time. And I had then 4 days to fill. And I fill that time with positive things now. But back then, I didn't. All I did was drink and go out. So I didn't really have any other hobbies. Once the football really stopped being serious at about 21, I just,
Do you
I thought,
think, Chris, do you know what? First of all, thank you so much for being so honest and open. I honestly believe this is going to help so many people, you being so honest and open with your own story. And isn't it interesting that when the football stopped, when then the job took over, but then you had 4 days with nothing really, no kind of hobbies, stuff, something to fill your time, combined with, well, this is my weekend now because this is my time off. I'll get myself some drink. That do you think, kind of looking back in that now, that there was an element of, I don't know, maybe boredom, maybe not having the football and something to, keep you busy and keep you connected with other people?
yeah, I think that was it totally, really. And I've always been, like I said from an early age, I get obsessed about things. So
Yeah.
yeah, once the football stopped, and I weren't no good at football, that's why it stopped. I got to 2021, I weren't going to get any higher than I'd ever played. So,
Yeah.
I just started playing on a Sunday morning, which didn't help with the drinking culture, because that's all that is really. So yeah, my focus had changed, and instead of obsessively going out and having a run to be fit, it what, I clung on to something else which was negative, and the boredom. Yeah, I've always got to have something to do. So
Yeah.
I, I can work 8 days in a row. If I've got one day off, then I'm struggling if I haven't got things to do. So 4 days off was a, a, a real bad thing for me, really. And because my one thing I did was drink, that's what I got obsessed with. And
Yeah, and you know what, Chris? Like you were saying, like now that you're very positive, you fill your time now with a lot of positivity. I'm guessing that looking back when you started working, you mentioned being 40 years of age. So we're going back roughly about 20 years ago. That
Yeah.
I'm guessing there wouldn't be as much out there knowledge about positivity, mindfulness, meditation. Do you know what I mean? Like, and the culture side as well, Chris, you mentioned that. Do you think culture and lifestyle and society, what people are surrounded with, plays a massive part of alcohol addiction?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, the culture really I was involved in was, I was a very laddish bloke from an early age. So, um, you're drawn to other people like yourself. So I've got a lot of mates who are very similar to me. And, you know, really from the start when I started drinking, it weren't 4 or 5 beers and then go home and have a bit of food like some people do. It was, let's be as stupid as we can, let's drink as much as we can,
Yeah.
and get up to all sorts of trouble. Um,
Do
and
you know
that's
what?
what I was surrounded with.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And I'm also mindful of the job that you do as a firefighter. I mean, that must be a difficult job to do, that it almost makes me wonder, being a firefighter, does a drink also serve a purpose of escapism and, just escaping from the seriousness of the job and some of the things you may see in your job?
I think it can be, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people in my work who have had issues with drink and drugs, and yeah, I think it must be relatable to it.
Yeah.
Personally, back then, I don't think that was a reason for me
Yeah.
because I was so fresh in the job, and the things that I was seeing, as far as I was aware, weren't really having an effect on me. They have more of an effect on me now, but
Yeah.
in the first 10 years, there wasn't really. But I'm sure later on in life, people will use, whatever they need, drink, whether it's just that, to cope with, certain parts of the job, because it's escapism, really, isn't it? And
Yeah.
whether you're escaping from traumatic things you've seen at work or in your life, or just how you feel day to day, the reason I started to have a problem with alcohol was because I was using it to forget about things.
Yeah.
So I had problems in my life that I just couldn't get away from. There was with me every second of every day, and if I had a drink, there was temporarily uh,
A
gone
relief.
for a period, yeah, and it was like, oh, thank God, I don't have to think about that no more,
Yeah.
and that's why it was so kind of addictive, because the only time I wasn't stressed and anxious about day to day life was when I was drinking. So that's why I was compelled to drink more and more and more. But unfortunately, drinking more made me make bad choices in life, which caused more problems, which made me drink more the next
It's
time. And
almost like a vicious cycle, isn't it, Chris? You could almost
yeah,
draw out that cycle of what you're talking about there. And so many people will be able to relate to this, Chris. And the thing is that addiction comes in so many forms. It's not just alcohol, it's drugs, it's addicted to the gym, it's,
yeah,
addicted to food. It's, like addiction is just comes under so many different guises here. It's
yeah,
interesting. Like I know that my supervisor, Jill, when I take different scenarios with clients to supervision, and sometimes we will have a debate about, when they say about people having an addictive personality. Personally, I do think that is a thing. Actually, from what I've come across, Chris, I really do believe that. I think some people, whether they're born or not, but they have addicted personalities. And, when I work with addiction with different clients, Jill is always saying to me, get them to find a better addiction.
Yeah,
That sometimes it isn't a case of the way you can just stop, that if you have that addictive nature, it can almost be impossible to stop that. And I welcome any listeners to have examples where that's not true, because I think we're all learning from each other. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
So I think it's really good to have an open mind and to hear different stories. Based on my own experiences, yeah, that's what I've seen. And
yeah,
actually finding a better addiction, sometimes it is about that. Finding, becoming addicted to meditation, that's going to do the least amount of harm than alcohol
yeah.
or drugs. I wonder about the support you've had throughout your life, Chris. I wonder what's been helpful, and I wonder what's been unhelpful, actually, as
Yeah,
regards
well,
support.
yeah, I mean, just to comment on what you just said as well, and that leads into this, that some of the help I've got is that I was lucky enough, and I still do, see a psychotherapist called Alan Dovey, who's employed by the fire service to help people who are struggling with all sorts of things. And
Yeah,
it, he once told me that you're born with addiction and you can't get rid of it, and that just like you just said, you have to redirect it. And when I heard that, it really, really helped, because I'd spent years and years trying to control my drinking and just failing every time.
yeah,
I could easily go a month without drinking and then think, oh, I'm all right now. As soon as I have a drink, I drink for 3 days and I don't sleep. And then I'm an absolute mess, not wanting to live.
yeah,
Um, so when he told me it's about redirecting it, when he told me that I'm not going to be able to stop having these addictive tendencies and I've got to redirect it, it really helped, because it was kind of like an acceptance that I'm never going to be that person who has a drink on a Sunday afternoon and then goes home, because it's never happened. And
yeah,
you know, as soon as I have one or two, if I put that drink down, then the anxiety is so bad that I have to keep drinking. So
yeah.
once I have one, there's no stopping it. Um, but yeah, he said, just redirect it into positive things. So now I'm addicted to the gym, and I know I am.
Yeah,
Every day I do something to keep fit. I'm going for a run as soon as we stop talking. I've already been to the gym this morning, but I've
yeah.
got to go for a run. As soon as we finish, I'll go for a run. And if I don't, I get that similar sort of anxiety, like, oh, I haven't done it. And if for some reason I can't get out today, which I will, but if I can't, that will cause a little bit of unease as well. So
Yeah.
even in the positives, there's a bit of, I'm dependent on something. So if I pick up an injury, I can struggle because if I can't get out and do something. But
If you can't do it, yeah. And do you know
yeah,
what, Chris? That makes me think of the pandemic and the amount
yeah,
of people that struggled through the pandemic, and how much addiction was on the rise
right,
because of the pandemic. So again, not being able to get out, not being able to do stuff, and then kind of trying to fill your time, boredom, release, relief, whatever people needed, escapism. It's so easy to then become addicted to alcohol, drugs, that we need it as human beings. We need to be able to get out and do stuff, and we absolutely need to be able to connect with each other. Connection.
yeah,
I was watching a video earlier on, and it was said the opposite to addiction is connection. And
yeah,
I thought, okay, that's a very interesting way of looking at it, because as human beings, we do need that connection. And the amount of people that have struggled through the pandemic and have continued to struggle because
yeah,
of those couple of years of getting into bad habits that have become addictions for some people.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was a tough time, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Like you said, that it could be the boredom of that time of the COVID time that led people to start drinking too much, and it doesn't take a long time to get hooked on something. You could have had
yeah.
these tendencies, these addictive tendencies, without even knowing about it. But booze, drugs, they're very addictive. So if you just get into a bad habit for a couple of months, you can be in real trouble. But what uh, the help I've had in the past has been brilliant,
Hmm.
and without it, I'd be an absolute I don't know where I'd be really, because
Yeah,
I think I drunk. It was probably at the age of about 28, 29, where so I'd had about 6 or 7 years of it just getting worse and worse.
yeah,
And I kept trying to stop and I couldn't. Um, you know, I'd lie about what I was drinking. My mates knew that I had a problem, but they didn't know to the extent of what I was doing.
yeah,
My wife, who I've been with since I was 18, she'd left me at one point. She'd moved out. That caused a major, I think it was about a 10-day binge where I just didn't stop ever.
yeah,
Um, Pretty much if I was awake or was drinking, it was as bad as it got, really. And that led me to get help at an addiction centre, where I had some really good support to help me, really. And I tried my very best to work a program which was controlling drink.
yeah.
That failed. That was
Okay.
about a 3 or 4 month where I was having weekly sessions. My first attempt at drinking ended up in a 2-day binge. I missed work. I was crying. I was wanting to kill myself.
Yeah,
And that was really the end of it for me. It was, I can still remember sitting in my bathroom, crying to myself like I did nearly every day, thinking, I can't do this again.
yeah.
And I kind of accepted that I can't ever drink again. I continued to get help through the same place, which went on for many years with support groups.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had a lot of help. My family's been supportive. I'm not sure they understand. I've got a lovely
Do you
mum and
know
dad.
what, Chris? I was just thinking that actually, when you said that there, I'm not sure that they understand. I was only just thinking that, Chris, that I'm kind of guessing that unless you've been through, like when you're talking about those places you went to for the help, and when it didn't work, and you've been doing like weekly sessions or that, that must. No, I'm making an assumption here, Chris, that I'm guessing that, like it sounds like that could have been soul destroying. That they're getting the help, and then when it doesn't work, like I know myself that when I first went into therapy, I thought that you're fixed for life after I finished. And to go back to that dark place again, I felt like such a failure. Whereas I now not know that people like myself will always work in progress. That it's never
Yeah,
you're fixed for life, and
no.
that's something that you learn how to manage. And when you were saying about like your family that you're not sure that they understand, what is it like having been through a Chris, and it's still been something that you have to manage probably for the rest of your life here, the same with me and depression, that what do you think people don't understand about alcohol addiction? What do you think are the misconceptions or the judgments around it?
Um, I mean, I've had really positive experiences with people regarding it. Really, I've always been well. I wasn't honest for 10 years, but then since I quit, I've been really honest,
Yeah,
and I've had a lot of support and a lot of friends who drink a lot. You know, tell me what a great thing I've done and that it's the right thing to do. So, I haven't had that many negative experiences, but I think generally, I think a lot of people, I hear it a lot. Not specifically to myself, but about how they bring it on themselves, and the bloke's
yeah,
homeless and he's drinking. He ain't helping himself, and it's kind of frustrating because no one wants to be an alcoholic or
sure.
have a drug addiction or
Yeah,
just a drink problem.
yeah,
It's what supersedes that, and what's got them to that position, and it's something that a lot of people will never understand. Um, you know, no one wants to be addicted to booze, and
yeah. Do you
or
know
something.
something, Chris? When you were saying there about the judgment of some people if they bring it on themselves, it's
Yeah,
almost there's almost a judgment like you're choosing this life, you're
yeah,
choosing to be an alcoholic, and as you said, nobody chooses, and you don't think, "Wow, what are you going to be when you grow up? I'm going to be an alcoholic." It's not.
yeah.
So there is, unless you've been through it, I'm guessing it's very hard to understand. And wow, Chris, like what's helped you through this? Like I know I can hear how open you are for support and stuff like that. It just sounds like you've been through so much and you're such a survivor. And here you are talking openly about it. And it sounds like that it's always going to be a bit of a roller coaster, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, well, it is a roller coaster, and like you said, you're never through it. And I've had many relapses.
Yeah,
I have 2 years I don't have a drink. Then something goes wrong in my life, and I go and drink a bottle of whatever it is,
yeah,
and then I have another 18 months sober, and then so relapses are part of the journey anyway.
yeah,
So there's some people who they stop drinking and they don't drink for 30 years, and then there's other people like myself who every 2 years, I might fall off, but I'm a million times better than I was before I gave up the booze. So I'm prepared and I can deal with it.
yeah,
And you know, hopefully the last time you drink is always going to be. You always hope it's going to be the last time, but you always have to be aware that it might not be the last time, and that's really important because
yeah,
when I'm feeling bad in life, I'm vulnerable, and if I've got poor mental health, which I've always struggled with, I
yeah,
can. There's always a chance I'm going to drink, but it also applies when you're really happy because your brain tricks you. So sometimes you can have a great year, be really happy, and then your brain says, oh, "I wonder if I can have a drink now,"
yeah,
and it's so convincing, and you believe because you want to do it so much. You believe that because you're doing so well in life and things are okay, you think you might be able to handle it. And every single time I've thought that and tried it, it's ended worse than the last time.
yeah.
Um, so you have to be really careful that when things are good, that you still make not drinking an active part of your life.
Yeah,
So I haven't I haven't drunk now for about 4 or 5 months after a really nasty experience drinking.
yeah.
I'm feeling the best I've ever felt, but
Wow,
every day I'm
crazy.
doing something that reinforces why I don't drink. Like today's chat with you, I'm going to groups with other people who've got addictive problems.
Yeah,
It may just be a 10-minute YouTube video, which I watch and think, oh, that's why I don't drink anymore.
yeah,
Stop doing that sort of stuff and just live my life. Those thoughts can creep back into my head of, oh, I wonder if drinking might be okay this time.
yeah.
So I have to make it. I have to make sure I do something nearly every day that reinforces why alcohol is just not something I can have in my life
It's
anymore.
almost, Chris, it's almost like you're saying never become complacent, never think, oh, I'm
That's it. Yeah.
grand now, maybe I can have that drink. That, as you say, I mean, it's valuable advice here, Chris, that almost every day you need to be watching something to remind yourself of the consequences and why you're making these choices. Chris, I know we mentioned about OCD a bit at the start, so I'm curious about OCD and alcohol addiction. Is there a link, do you think?
Yeah, I think there is. Obviously, I've got no like medical
And you
input to
don't
put
have to,
into it
Chris, we're all
because
learning. Okay.
yeah,
I don't believe anybody's the expert. We're all learning.
yeah. I mean, I believe it is linked in that side as
Yeah.
well. But just people I talk. I've got a lot of people who have got. I know who've got similar issues to me because I surround myself with a lot of people who have been through similar things.
Yeah.
And we all tend to have the same. The OCD issues, which I've had forever. Um, the addictive personality, the obsessive behaviour.
Yeah.
I recently found out I got ADHD, and that links it all up together. That I'm unable to sit still. I'm always trying to find something to stimulate myself with. I mean, I've been addicted to everything you could think of:
Yeah.
drugs, uh, pornography,
Yeah.
gambling, buying things. And then, like I said, the positive things, like if I start playing golf, I don't switch off from it to the point where it drives me crazy, because
Yeah.
I'm on YouTube for 3 hours looking at different videos about how to hold the club, and the thoughts are with me when I'm at work and when I'm talking to people. I can't get them out of my head. So that obsessive thinking is kind of, it's entwined with the addiction, because
Yeah.
it's not always a drinking, which, I mean, obviously that is a big problem. But
Mm.
it's when I wasn't drinking, I was always thinking about drinking. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
5 minutes where I wasn't thinking about drinking, and thinking about when I was finishing work and I could go and get that drink, and thinking about how much I'm drinking, and I just obsess about it all day. So I think that OCD is so linked to it, because a certain type of person's got that brain which has to just, it's all or
Do you
nothing
know
on
what,
everything.
Chris? I think you're absolutely spot on what you're saying there. I don't think any medical expert, could say it any better. Exactly what you're saying. Those obsessive thoughts, obsessive compulsive disorder. You can see the link in that. And it's interesting how, like, even when I look back in times in my life about food, where I'd be thinking about what am I going to have for my next meal? And I'd be constantly thinking about food all the time, to the point where it would almost take over my life. So,
Yeah,
it's amazing the links to that. Like the type of behaviors that we're talking about can be linked to any kind of addiction here. And then
yeah,
it's interesting that you mentioned about the ADHD as well, and as you said, you got a recent diagnosis of that. Like, there's so many explanations to things. Like, so many more people are open to an ADHD diagnosis now, and it can make so much sense for people. And also, Chris, you mentioned about the pornography. That is something that I have come across so much more, actually, especially in young men in their 20s, especially during the lockdown, becoming addicted to pornography and
yeah,
feeling like that there's something wrong with them and getting obsessed, and it can cause an awful lot of turmoil for people's mental health. That these things are can easily happen, and it's so important that we become aware of ourselves and what we're like as people. So for you, Chris, you need to be occupied. You need to be doing something. You know that when you look back at your timeline of your life and those 4 days off, actually, that in hindsight, know what you know now, you probably would have, had something else in there that was a much better addiction, but you weren't to know that. So you can see how it follows through, and if we
yeah,
make sense of our lives instead of giving ourselves a hard time. And I love the fact that you spoke about being accepting of the relapse as well, Chris. Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? And sorry, Chris, because I know I'm taking a lot of different topics that we've been talking about. So if I've confused you, please feel free to say that, because I
Yeah.
even confuse myself sometimes, Chris. Maybe I've got ADHD.
Maybe.
Maybe. But yeah, that there's just so many different factors. And then that acceptance that it's okay to relapse, because I can imagine the more hard you are on yourself, the more likely you are to go straight to the bottle to feel better about yourself. And then you're
Yeah,
in that circle again.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it is something that, that's what I learned when I went to these recovery groups. That it's part of the process. That every relapse is still, it's a small step back, and then there'll be a bigger step forward. You never go back to the beginning, and it's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it happens, and you just, you accept it, and then you can move on with more help. But it's one thing I want to say, while it's
Yeah.
just popped into my head as well, is that the thing with drink as well, especially, is that there's no like black or white. Like a lot of people, like in the early days, a lot of people say, well, you ain't an alcoholic, are you? And people have got this vision of what an alcoholic is. And most of the time it's, some bloke on a park bench drinking out of the paper bag. And
Yeah.
that in a lot of recovery groups now, they banish that word alcoholic because no one really knows what it means anyway. It's
Yeah.
better, it's more, think about, have you got a problem with alcohol? And is it having more of a negative impact in your life than a positive? And if it's more of a negative one, which mine certainly is,
Yeah.
it's something that you need to address, whether it means you stop drinking or just cut back. But a lot of people, a lot of people, like, if you're not like the lowest of the low and you've lost everything, they kind of think, well, you ain't really got a problem. But someone could drink a bottle of wine every night and not have an issue. Someone could drink one glass of wine every night and they could have a big, big problem with it
Yeah.
because it's how it affects that individual. So if I didn't have all my mental health problems I've had and the obsessive behaviour and all that, then I might not have ended up with a drink problem. But because of
Yes.
how my mental health is, the amounts I was drinking, it was causing me a huge problem. But the next guy could drink more than I did and not have a problem. It's individual. So there's no, you drink this certain amount. Obviously, there's certain amounts of alcohol which are bad for you.
Yeah, I
Health
suppose when we look at
wise,
that medically, Chris, I
medically,
suppose
yeah,
if we'd a doctor on the call, I'm sure they'd have
yeah,
something to add to that about the stage of
yeah,
somebody's liver. But it's
yeah,
interesting, like, and I know you don't particularly like the word alcoholic, and I totally get that. One of the terms that I've come across is like a functioning alcoholic. I can't think of a
yeah,
better term for it for the moment. It's something I come across a lot actually, where people are drinking excessive amounts and then they go about their jobs, their daily lives. Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose the way I look at it is that you kind of know whether you're controlling it or it's controlling you. That's kind of
yeah,
whatever it is. That's kind of how my own personal kind of approach to stuff is that if I'm in control of something, like I feel food, I'm very much in control of it. I calorie count. I do what I do to kind of just maintain my weight. I know that if I wasn't mindful of that, I would be prone to be very obese. I know that. So again, it's just about knowing yourself as a personality and knowing you. So it is like, just kind of, there's so much to learn with this. And again, it's whether it controls you. And yeah, it's a funny one, Chris, isn't it?
yeah. And the food addictions like that. I've had food addictions, but more like, just eating loads of crisps, loads of sweets, all that sort of stuff. But it's never really been an issue. But that's like maybe the biggest addiction of them all because, the amount of people who are obese and, you know, that's kind of like the frustrating attitude that people have that you spoke about earlier with drink, that people think, you brought it on yourself. You're not born overweight and all you got to do is exercise. No one's eating all that because they want to get fat. You know,
Yeah,
9 times out of 10, they're struggling with something in their life and their comfort and escapism is
yeah.
food. And it's so readily, obviously available. You have to eat. So that's why so many people get in a problem. And a lot of people have an attitude like they're lazy and, it's their own fault. But it's only because they're escaping from something and that food is their chosen.
Yeah,
Uh,
and you know something, Chris? Like one of my recent podcasts was on body shaming, both thin and fat shaming. And do you know what? I think with all of what we're speaking about, I think there's a huge element of autonomy as well here. That I'm a firm believer, like when I did about the fat shaming, the thin shaming podcast, of that whatever size you are, to own it, to love yourself and not judge yourself, whatever size you are. I would say that with an addiction, I would say that whatever's going on for you, not to judge yourself over it. And actually, for some people might be happy drinking a bottle of vodka a day. And you know what? If they are making a conscious choice and that's how they choose to live their life and they're not harming anybody else, so be it,
Yeah,
actually. I'm a firm believer of autonomy and each to their own. So we're highlighting only if this is a problem for people.
that's it. Yeah.
And do you know what I mean? And they want to learn about it. It makes me wonder, Chris, that if you could talk to that 20-year-old self, so when things really started to change and the work and the days off, knowing what you know now, if you could go back and have a chat to your 20-year-old self, what would you say to him or what advice would you give him?
Um, well, I'd probably obviously, tell him all the things that I know now. But
Yeah.
that would be a lovely scenario. But the unfortunate thing, the thing with life is that you don't learn things in one day, do you?
No.
So, when I speak to someone now, when I quit drinking, I had a lot of people message me on Facebook and that sort of stuff, asking for help and just not, just advice, and because I was open about it.
Yeah.
And you try and help somebody like I'd try and help my 20-year-old self, but I finished speaking to him, and I know that it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a quick fix for that person because it's
No.
probably going to take 2-3 years or however long for them to make a mistake, then
Yeah.
learn something, then make a mistake and then learn something.
Yeah.
And it takes all that crap you go through to then get hopefully to the place that you want to be.
Yeah.
So I always think, this person's going to go through it for a few years, because I think it's very rare that someone just goes, I've got a problem with something, and then I'll stop it the next day and I'm all right.
You know what?
So,
It's a
you
fair
know,
point, Chris.
it's like I, I tell a 20-year-old person, these are the things you need to do. But until you live it and realise, like, it was quite interesting when you spoke about earlier about it. Was it really dejecting when I tried to control drinking with the help of a therapist and then I
Yeah.
failed? He actually, when I went in and said that it all went badly wrong,
Yeah.
uh, he said, yeah, and he said, I knew it would. And I was like, well, if you knew it would, why did you make me do it? And I still remember it now, 10 years on. And he said, I was 90% sure that you would never be able to control your drinking because of your personality and everything we've spoke about. He said, but it's important that you had to go through it. So him telling me that I'd never be able to control my drinking wouldn't have worked. But me putting all these things in place and all the time I spent trying to find a way to control it and then fail drastically was something that I needed, and something that he probably knew was going to happen for me then to move on to that next step of, I can't control drinking and it's got to
Wow.
be.
So in a way, Chris, you needed to see that for yourself, regardless
Yeah,
what anybody said to you. And
yeah,
there's a really important message to take from that, Chris. I can imagine, especially for parents that might be listening to this, and maybe they might have, an adult son or even a teenage daughter with, drink problems. But actually, sometimes they actually need to go through that trial
yeah.
and error to learn this, that what Chris, there's so much to take from this. I'm mindful of our time because we're actually coming towards the end of this. And wow, Chris, there's so much like from this, there really is, that I wonder if, let's say, there is somebody listening to this, Chris, that is really
Yeah.
struggling with alcohol addiction. What would you want to say to them?
So, yeah, if you're struggling and you think you got a problem, I mean, someone once said to me that if you're constantly thinking, have I got a drink problem, it's probably likely that you have, because people who haven't got a drink problem never seem to ask the question.
Yeah.
Um, so if you're thinking you got a drink problem, just go and get some help. You can go to your GP and they can put you in touch with people. I've had some really good support through the NHS. So you've got that option. They can get you then in touch with addiction specialist centres where you can go and talk to people that are just that you'll be able to relate to,
Yeah.
and get the help and support you need from them. There's loads of help out there. Most towns and cities have got addiction centres.
Yeah.
AA is scattered all around the country. NA, which is the drug,
Addiction narcotics, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you've got problem with drugs, it's like the AA, but for drugs. So,
Yeah.
it's always the hardest thing because you don't know to accept it. The last thing I wanted to do, my life was drinking and playing up and having a laugh, but it stopped being a laugh for me. But I didn't want to let go of that person because that's all I knew. So it's really scary to then step into another world where the thing that's brought you loads of joy. Because the thing is, as much as drinking made me, not want to be here for 10 years,
Yeah.
but I still had really good times with it. And I've got great memories of it. And, it wasn't all bad. And so some of my highlights were when I was drunk. And, it's hard to accept that may not be your life. But, just try and get some, but even if it's just your GP to start with, they'll direct you to more specialists to get help. And one thing I want to add before you wrap it up is as much as it affects the person drinking, the effect it has on those around you is just as bad. And that's what's so damaging about it. Like, my wife went through hell, really, where, she was always anxious herself because of what she, when I pick up a drink, what she knew what was going to happen. The constant coming home. And in the morning I'd be drinking. She'd go to bed and wake up and I'd be drinking, and I hadn't been to bed. And it was hell for her. I ruined our wedding, which is something I've got to live with forever because I couldn't control my drinking. And, then it went on to my mum and dad, seeing them cry because, they're seeing the states that I'm in.
The knock-on effects. I can really hear that, Chris.
Massive, and you could, it's just really hard. It's really. I think it might even be harder for them because they're just thinking, just stop drinking, will you? Because look what you're doing to yourself, and there's nothing that they can do because that person's only going to stop once they've gone through this cycle of learning, making a mistake, learning.
Yeah. And
there's not much you can do other than try and be patient and show support, which is really odd when you see someone just having a bad, what seems to be a bad attitude and not carrying on doing the same things. But it's just so complex that
it really is, Chris. And that support, as you mentioned, your supportive wife, your family, having that support, reaching out for help. Chris, you're amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Here you are, so many decades later, but your story is of hope. And it might be a case of managing it and being up and down and maybe relapse every couple of years, but sometimes that is just how it is. And we don't need to judge ourselves for it. We all have something. None of us are perfect. Perfect would be boring, and I certainly hope that people listening to this podcast will find this helpful, and I really welcome their comments or anything that people want to add listening to this podcast about their experiences if they wanted the comments, because I believe it's all about helping each other. Chris Evans, thank you so much for your time today.
No, thanks. It was nice to talk to you. I'll go for my run now.
Good stuff, Chris. See you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Counsellor Convos with Sheila McMahon. If you've enjoyed this episode, consider checking out her YouTube channel or pop on her website, mindmanagementforyou.com.